encourage you to do is to dare to be different. Right? So if you follow the theme from where we started today, I would argue that the majority of companies, at least over my 20-year history, that have engaged in these types of projects typically engage in them in a very consistent and predictable and traditional way. And what we know is that predictable, traditional way fundamentally leads to a higher rate of project failure than I suspect most organizations are aware of. Now, the good news is as I have worked my way through the 2 decades of projects, we've landed on projects that have been extremely successful. And there are certain inherent consistencies across those projects, and that's really where we want to spend the balance of our time today, is talking about taking a different approach to engaging a different type of solution provider that's going to fundamentally drive a very different type of result. So with that, we want to talk about the selection process itself.
Let's get away from the request for punishment. So my favorite one is, if I were going to buy software and looking for a solution provider today, I would narrow my list. I mean, I would narrow through a bunch of processes looking at, what software, because it's ironic, a lot of people don't look at the actual financial strength of some of these software vendors, right? But if you're going to use that software for 6 to 10 years, it'd be nice to know that they're going to be there. But, you have to do your due diligence. You have to get to a short list. But one of my favorite ideas is getting to what I call a request for creativity or a request for ideas. Because I like to lay out what the business challenges are that the company that's selecting the software is experiencing, and then ask 2 or 3 solution providers to come in and have a really collaborative, investigative session so that we can determine from their creativity and our needs and our creativity what the best solution is. Right? And I often would recommend to a client, you guys should invest that money with that solution provider, buy their time, so you get their best people there, and it's almost like it's not like a beauty contest. It's more like a tryout for an ad concept or an advertising agency. You have to come in knowing what the business issues are, with your best people and brightest people, to solve the business problem. What are we trying to solve from a business problem point of view, and be creative at it. And in doing so, you'll instantly get great ideas. I mean, the worst case, you're going to get some really good ideas for your solution you never had before. The other thing you'll do is get a sense of people that really understand your business and really can bring value outside of what you've thought about. And this is what I'm trying to get to here, right? What value can they bring if we let them bring that to the table? If we invite them in, have them do a small engagement with us, what value can we derive from that? And I think that's a really important step.
Yeah, I would completely agree, George. And what I find interesting about the whole request for creativity concept is that many organizations actually facilitate that type of a workshop internally before they reach out to the solution provider community with a predetermined solution set. So in a lot of cases, it's not about replacing work or creating work that isn't already being done. It's about inviting the solution providers into that process at an earlier stage to generate more creative ideas to how you can solve the business problems that you have. One of the other approaches that I've been engaged in over the past handful of years is around joint solutions procurement. And so, one of the strategies that we see as being quite effective out there is organizations that start with the business problem itself. And it really builds on George's comments about the request for creativity, where they will, shortlist 2 or 3 organizations that have demonstrable success in the given vertical industry that they're in, and then they will fund a short, I want to call it strategy session at the front end of the project, where they start with the business problem, allocate with smart people for 2 or 3 days to workshop and brainstorm through what the end solution is going to be, rather than bringing an end solution to the table and then asking if you've got the capabilities to actually provide that. And the interesting thing about the joint solutions procurement process is it actually came out of public sector, which is not necessarily known for being the most creative and the most open as it relates to procurement. But what they found is that as they tightened down their procurement processes and became more and more prescriptive over the years, the actual value they derived from these investments got smaller and smaller. So they took some of these bad habits that we've been talking about here today to an extreme, and what they learned at the end of that extreme is that they needed to find a different way. And that fundamentally drove the joint solutions procurement methodology, which we highly recommend.
Right, and so the other thing, I'll just cap off the last point before we move on to the next slide, and that is we think that if you invest some money up front with a solution provider in joint solutions procurement or creativity or capabilities or those type of sessions, really getting to the bottom line. We think that every dollar you invest there, you're going to save $5 to $10 in the project cost ongoing.
Yeah, and I would say, George, that those numbers are extremely conservative.
I would say so as well.
Based on the projects that I've worked at. So what I want to do now is I want to contrast the buying process that we talked about earlier with a more collaborative approach that we know is supported by the business partners that are associated with Software Think Tank. So we talked earlier about traditional project approach. Functional challenges are identified. The requirements are then defined internally. They've converted those into some form of RFP. There's a vendor parade and some kind of selection criteria that occurs. The project is then implemented, and then there's a project impact that falls out of that. Hopefully a project impact that is equivalent to what was anticipated at the beginning. And I would argue that about 85 to 90% of all of the projects that we get exposed to by the direct end customer, by organizations like yours that are listening today, at least at the beginning, are orchestrated to follow this path. And this is the path that will lead to better than 65% of your projects being failed. And so what we'd like to do is recommend kind of a different approach. So rather than focusing on the functional requirements, take a step back. Engage with the solution providers in better defining what the business drivers are behind the project. Document them specifically in business language and document what the anticipated business benefits are that the organization, your organization, is looking to realize as a result of this investment. And with that knowledge, let's kind of take a step back a bit and say, okay, what are some of the external industry drivers that are also in play here? What are the things that are outside of our control that are impacting either the business model or the business strategy that your organization is continuing to invest in over time? Because what that's going to do is it's going to shine the light on other potential benefit areas that I suspect are not contemplated in the scope of this project itself. And now, with that kind of grounding in external industry drivers, let's spend a little bit of time on the objectives and strategies and metrics that the organization is delivering on or attempting to deliver on relative to this project. And then let's look at the business and the business process challenges that are getting in the way of this. So if you look at these three bodies of work, looking at the external industry drivers is looking at things that we cannot control. There are things like changing customer behaviors, competitive behavior, the economy, changing regulatory compliance. These are things that are happening to us. The next stage, the objective strategies and the metrics, these are things that we're doing. Every organization has growth objectives, cost reduction objectives, and then they've got some form of risk reduction objectives, typically wrapped into compliance. Right? And out of that will fall specific business processes and challenges that are going to get in the way of the organization meeting those growth objectives or meeting those cost reduction objectives. It's only with this kind of a high-level understanding of an organization's priorities that we can really meaningfully look at the software that we represent and put together a solution set that's going to have the highest amount of value to an organization. So I've been facilitating this type of collaborative engagement for the better part of 12 years. And what I know is that when we front-end a project with this discussion, what we come out with is a higher degree of executive commitment to the initiative, primarily because they understand at an economic level how this investment is going to impact the core objectives that they have to meet themselves. And we've identified specifically where the challenges are, whether it's in their business or in their business processes, that's going to get in the way of them delivering on those objectives. So with that clarity, you end up with project priorities that are crisp, clear definition of what the risks are, clear definition of what the project success criteria is, and then clear perspective on the business case elements. We will know at the end of this experience exactly how much value there is in this investment, and then of course the leadership team can make logical, informed choices as to whether they want to fund this initiative or whether they won't. Which kind of brings me to an interesting point, because the trend that we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years is a high percentage of these projects ending up unfunded. Full 6-month buying cycle, deep engagement with various stakeholders across the company, and then at the end of the day, because there's no strong, clear business case, the project ends up losing that capital to some other initiative internally that's simply a little bit more interesting to the organization. Right? So if there's any risk of the projects that you're looking at running up against competition for capital, engaging with a business partner that understands this process is going to significantly increase the probability the project gets funded. But more importantly, what it's going to do is it's going to significantly increase the business impact this project has on your organization.